voted or signed to have the vote to remove Christina. What transpired, what were the reasons that we had that we decided that that was necessary. I want to talk about some of the arguments that have been made from Christina's camp about how they understand the bylaws, and I want to show you how all the, not all of them, but a fair number of times that she has been violating the bylaws herself. And then I want to share with you all the bylaws that were relevant to this meeting and let you decide for yourself whether or not who's following the bylaws. So hopefully, and then I'll take any questions, and I'll be here, if we run out of time, I'll be here as late as you guys need afterwards, answering any questions anyone has. So she's failed in many areas. So she talked about having a bottom-up support from the delegates and having the party run by the delegates. And in effect, she's basically boxed out all the delegates. She boxed out the state committee. We don't even get to decide things. Things are decided and then brought to the committee, and we're told what happened. She stated that she could raise about $2 million per month, and she's raised about 1% of that, which is very disappointing. The profit and loss statement that's been provided to the committee, which took months, 6-7 months to get any data financially from the administration to the state committee, shows that we're operating at about a $100,000 loss on the annual basis. And we owe over $500,000 in debt still. Now, it's perfectly normal to inherit debt when you're a new chairperson. New chairperson starts their term at the beginning of an odd year, like 2023. That's right after a big election, so parties borrow a lot of money going into that election, try and win the election, and then they quickly pay it off and raise money. By comparison, I believe at this time, in the previous cycle, they had more debt inherited by the chair, but they paid that off by spring. And then they started raising money so that by the time we got to the calendar year of the election, we were in a good position to support our candidates. Without the approval of the budget committee, this is one of the biggest issues, is we're constantly seeing money spent, borrowed, and spent again without any input from the budget committee. So they spent $89,000 to one of her supporters for computers and IT. And they provided no invoice for this. They have no invoice. And then they said, well, there might be an invoice, but there's a conflict of interest waiver clause or confidentiality clause that we can't share the invoice. And so, okay, well, that's not how this is supposed to work. They borrowed $110,000 to bring Jim Caviezel to Mackinac. They had no approval to borrow the money. They had no approval to spend the money. They could have had D'Souza and O'Keefe come for $60,000. We ended up having to pay O'Keefe $10,000 to not come because they signed him and then they didn't pay him, so he didn't come, and then they didn't cancel him properly. So we ended up having to pay him $10,000 anyway just to not be there.
There we go.
All right, in addition, we are defaulting on our loan to the Comerica Bank. So that line of credit that we have,
Works though.
Which we borrowed about $2.5 million into the election. We paid that down to about $400,000. It's now over $500,000 and it's in default because she hasn't been making the payments on it. Those payments are about $5,000 a month to keep it out of default. So there's really no excuse for it to be out of default. The legal counsel, they decided instead of paying the debt, they try and sell the building we don't own. They filed a lawsuit, and that lawsuit is for control of the building, to get rid of the debt. And basically every lawyer that we've ever talked to says this suit is going to get thrown out so fast. It's already been replied from the other parties. They're asking for sanctions, which is basically when lawyers do something that they definitely should not be doing. They want the court to impose additional fees. And all of that's going to add up to a judgment in the neighborhood of $900,000. Now what that means is that that's what the party's going to have to pay, which we don't have the money. And because we're an association and not a corporation, they can actually come after the individual members of the party. So all the state committee members can be held liable out of our own pockets for that money. And they filed this lawsuit without any input from the state committee, without any budget. Attorneys cost money, so filing a lawsuit is going to cost us $100,000 in attorney fees. We didn't approve any of that. She has a plan to control counties and districts, and you can talk to your county chair about that. She's trying to run closed caucuses where, you know, party insiders and delegates will get to select all the candidates and charge all the fees for candidates to participate. This is an easy way for Democrats to just file to be precinct delegates for Republicans, and then they could decide our own candidates. Voters wouldn't get to vote for Republican candidates, so your Republican county commissioner seat would be decided by county delegates, not by the voters in that district. And at the end of all this is not a personal thing about Christina. This is judging her on the performance, not on who she is, not on how much we like her or anything like that, or our friendships. Many of us have very close friendships with her, but this is a performance pass fail. We pay her a lot of money to do this job, and she's not getting it done. So decision was made to pursue the removal vote.
By 40 members.
Okay, so, wrong slide. Sorry, I'm getting the hang of this thing now. Okay, so when we started thinking about the process to remove Christina, the group that I'm working with of state committee members, one of the things that we expected was that if we were ever to get to a vote, and it's a big process to get there, and we succeeded, she would deny it. She would not, follow the will of the committee, and this would end up in court. Because of that, we took every step of the process, consultation from many lawyers, many parliamentarians, to make sure everything we did was correct in absolutely every way. Because if it's going to go to court, you don't want to do a bunch of work knowing you're going to go to court and then find out that you did it wrong, because you'd lose. So we followed every bylaw, and we kept every document. We have every record preserved. And then we get talking about Christina and the bylaws. She keeps telling us, oh, we're violating the bylaws. Well, let's talk about her and the bylaws. The bylaws on the budget committee say the committee shall consist of one regular member from each congressional district committee. This committee shall maintain budget control, review and approve financial spending, and promote sound fiscal policy. Now, from what I've told you already, she's borrowing money, spending hundreds of thousands of dollars without any approval, without any consultation. She just does it and then comes to the budget committee and says, guess what? We need to pay this bill that I spent. That's not how it's supposed to work. She's failed to hold the required number of annual meetings for the vice chairs, the county chair advisory committee. In her response to our petition, she sent us an email on December 5th about the process to amend the bylaws. And she says that the individuals cannot put a bylaw change on the agenda. The bylaws state the process of amending bylaws. These individuals must first submit the request change to policy committee. If it passes policy committee, it will be sent to members 30 days. Well, there's no requirement that it passes policy committee. She just made that up, and she told us we're out of compliance because of this made-up rule. And then she attempted to appoint an additional state committee member just to avoid her removal. And this is the one that frustrates me the most, I think is the most important to really delve into for a second. So, we have 107 members on the state committee. The 107th member is the chairman of the county chair advisory committee. Now, this seat has been vacant for many, many months. Now, going into the end of the year, you heard that if to remove her, we had to file 54 signatures. How many heard 54 signatures? That number was 50% of the committee. Well, if the committee's 106 members, you need 53 signatures. But if it's 107 members, you need 54. So we have this 107th seat. It's been vacant for many, many months now, since a resignation back last year. And on Friday night, the 5th, hours before the meeting, she's on a Zoom call with all the county chairs, and she announces that she appointed a new chairman of the county chair advisory committee. So she made it 107 just hours before our meeting. But there are many county chairs that have been around a little bit of time, like Mr. Fortin in Macomb County. We've all heard of him. He's been around 2 or 3 years, I think. So he pressed and he said, wait a minute, you don't appoint that person. That person's supposed to be elected. And she's like, no, I appointed them. And finally, Mrs. Skibo pulled out the bylaws and read them. And this is what it says. In Article 3, it says, when describing all the members of the committee, the last part of it says, and a chairman of a county executive committee, that's what we call a county chair, as selected by the county chair advisory committee. So it clearly says it's selected by the committee. There's 2 sentences later in the bylaws that describe the committee. It says a minimum of 10 county chairmen shall be selected by the state party chairman to become members of this committee. This committee shall meet a minimum of 2 times each calendar year at the call of the chairman. So this committee is 2.5 sentences long. in its description in the bylaws. It's very clear how this 107th member becomes a member, and it's the only county chairperson that gets a vote on the committee. All the county chairs are members of the state committee, but they don't get to vote. Only this one particular county chair gets to vote, and they have to be elected by the county chair advisory committee. And she said she appointed them. Only so that she could, not because she wanted the county chairs represented, she would have done that a long time ago if that was the case. She did it only because she wanted to change the signature requirement by one more. And so eventually she relented and said, seems I may have had an error on my part. So, and that's all on video, and it's very frustrating to watch this process go down, and many of the members have been very frustrated. So, let's talk about the bylaws as they relate to a special meeting. So our bylaws and special meetings say special meetings of the committee may be called by the chairman when the business of the committee require the same. And the chairman shall call a special meeting of the committee upon written request of 1/3 of members. Okay? And at the very end here it says, notice of the special meeting shall state the purpose of the meetings. So the chairperson can call a meeting anytime they want for a special meeting, but they must call one on the request of 1/3 of the members. And all special meetings have a purpose. You can't have a special meeting just for no reason. You have to say why you're having a special meeting. So, we filed a petition on the December 2nd. We had the sufficient number of signatures, and we stated our purpose. On the 16th of December, Ms. Caramo called a special meeting for the 13th of January. However, the meeting she called did not have our purpose. So their argument is, well, she called a special meeting, so she met the requirements. But she didn't. And the reason we know she didn't is because their argument makes no sense. If there's a special meeting requested on the subject of dogs, that means that 1/3 of the committee has decided that dogs are important enough to discuss before the committee and urgent enough that we need to discuss them in a special meeting, not wait till our regularly scheduled meeting. Well, if the chairwoman can just call a meeting about fish and satisfy the requirement that she call a meeting about dogs, well then the committee doesn't ever actually have the authority to call its own meeting, because the chairperson could always just call a different meeting and say they satisfy the requirement. So that can't be the explanation. The only interpretation is that the chairperson must call the meeting as requested by the members. And therefore, because she did not call, we go to the second part of this that says she must call within 15 days. Upon failure to do so, any such member can give 5 days notice. So on the 31st, Bree Mogenberg of the 2nd District put out that call to the special meeting for January 6th. So this meeting was properly requested, was not called by the chair properly, and so that provides the committee the opportunity to call it themselves, which is what we did. Now, once we get to a meeting, we have the issue of quorum. Quorum, just basically as a concept, is that if you have a big group and they're making decisions, well, if only a few people show up to a meeting, they can't make decisions for the whole group. So you have to have a certain amount of people from that body there in order to have a legitimate meeting. So our bylaws say a quorum is a majority of membership of the committee present in person or by proxy. Shall constitute a quorum to transact all business of the committee, except where the action of the committee requires a larger number of members as specially set forth in the bylaws. So there are spots in the bylaws where it says a different number of quorum is required. Non-voting members, like the county chairs, don't count towards quorum. So the quorum would include all members and all proxies. And at the January 6th meeting, there was a quorum of 71. That's more than the half of 54. So there was a quorum at the meeting. Now we talk about proxies. And what constitutes a proxy? Well, there's two types of members for the committee, so there's two bylaws about proxies. The easiest one is the proxies for non-district members. Non-district members are people like Marion, who's an elected vice chair, could be the secretary, the treasurer. These are like kind of offices that don't come from a congressional district. Now those members can either show up to the meeting, they can appoint a proxy, or the seat sits vacant. Those are the only options. So Marion, I think, I'm not sure if she sent a proxy, but I know like our youth chair, Riley Linting, she did not come to the meeting. She did not send a proxy to the meeting. So her seat on the committee just sat vacant for that meeting. Now, the process works differently for district members. These are the members that come from the congressional district. There are 6 of them, and there's a district chair. So the process when they have a district member says, if a district member is not present for a particular meeting and has not provided a proxy, the district chairman, or in his absence, the remaining members present from the absent member's congressional district may select a registered voter of the congressional district to fill a vacancy for that meeting only. If the absent member should return to the meeting, the regular member shall regain full voting rights. So this is what happens at our meeting. So if a member shows up, great. If they don't show up, they can send someone to proxy on their behalf. That's good. If they don't do either of those things, they're not there, they haven't sent a proxy, then it becomes the responsibility of the district chair to have a registered voter from that district to appoint as a proxy. So if I'm not at a meeting and I don't send a proxy, then you just all met Hema, she's my district chair. She could appoint someone to be proxy for me. And if Hema wasn't there for any reason, then the other members of that 6th congressional district could appoint members to be proxies. The purpose of this is when there's business before the committee, district members represent the delegates in that district. So you don't want districts to be unrepresented. We want full representation from our districts. And so that's why we appoint these additional proxies. Now this last part, if I were to show up and a proxy had been appointed for me, I'd get my seat back. That actually happened twice on January 6th. We had 2 members from the 10th district that showed up late. They had proxies that were appointed by the district chair in their districts. Those proxies were removed and put in the guest section, and those members were seated front and center, and they participated in the rest of the meeting. So this is how the proxies are all appointed, and this is already, like, it was argued for like a week from the Christina people, but then they just did this last weekend, so they obviously think it's right now. So we also need to talk about amending the bylaws. So there's a process for amending the bylaws. Our Article 15 is the process of the amendment. It says submission in writing, all proposed amendments to the bylaws shall be first submitted in writing to the policy committee. Notification of committee members, section B. Each member of the committee shall receive notification in writing the context of any proposed amendment at least 30 days prior to the date before the proposed amendment is to be voted on. Now notice, nowhere in there did it say that the policy committee had to pass anything. It just said they had to be notified. So if we backed up to the email that Christina sent us saying, oh, it has to be passed by policy, that's not in the bylaws anywhere. And the finally, section C, vote required is 66.67%, and it should be made by members and not by proxy. So if you go into the minutes of the the January 6th meeting, you'll see, vote counts on this particular item and as well as on a few other things are much lower than the votes where the proxies were included, because proxies cannot vote on this. So in this case, the amendment that was considered on the 6th was an amendment from Mr. Ian Shetron of the 8th District. He sent it by email to the policy committee and all members on November 4th. That was more than 30 days before January 6th. So there's absolutely no reason that this could not be brought to the floor and voted upon per the requirements of the bylaws. And that amendment passed. It passed with over 66.67% required. I don't have the exact count on that because I forgot about it. Okay, so now we're talking about removal of an officer. And this is where we got into the real nitty gritty. Excuse me. All right, so removal by the committee. Any officer may be removed by an officer or member of the committee upon 60% vote of the committee present, voting at any meeting of the committee, provided there is a quorum present, and such 60% vote must be made in person by such members and not by proxy. Now, 2 things. First, the 60% used to be 75. That was the change that we made. And the reason we made that change is because a 75% threshold means that 26% of the committee can deny 74% of the committee what they want. Right. And that's, we like minority rights, but that seems a bit extreme to have 26% hold hostage to 74%. Most state parties across the nation use a 60% or 2/3, which is more reasonable. There are some that use just a strict majority. So we lowered ours from 75 to 60. So that is the requirement there. So that's the vote, and it is 60% of the committee present and voting at any meeting of the committee. Further, that in order to bring the question before the committee as to removal of an officer, the petition requesting that such a vote be taken, bearing the signatures of at least 50% of the entire committee, no proxies, shall be filed with the chairman, or if the chairman is the officer, then it's filed with the secretary. Which means, in order to bring this to the floor, you have to file the petitions. You don't have to file them a week in advance. You don't have to file them a month in advance. You just have to file them when someone stands up and says, I move to, remove the chair. Here are the petitions, filed. Now, in this case, we anticipated that Christina and the Secretary Angela would not show up to the 6th. So those petitions were, already scanned, and they were sent through email and about 15 minutes before we started the meeting. So they had them. They haven't disputed that they've had them. They've agreed that they've been there. Procedures for removal. Since removal of the chairman is discretionary, there's no formal, procedures required. So, on the vote to remove Christina, that was 40-5. That's an 88.89%. On the vote to remove Mr. Hartman, it was 39-2, which is 95%. This is Mr. Hartman participating in our meeting, casting his ballot.
So this is a process for removal. And I have indicated that if there is a 54 signatures, I won't even require myself to go to a vote. If you have 54 signatures of state party members that you think that there should be a vote on my removal, on that day I will tender my resignation. I'll be happy to go. If I don't have 50% support, I'm not interested in doing the job.
That was Mr. Hartman Friday night on his call, telling us that if we filed the signatures, he would just resign. He has not yet resigned. It's been more than, a week. So one of the questions that have been brought to everyone's attention is there people like, oh, I didn't know what I was signing. I didn't mean to sign that. I didn't want to remove Christina. So I just want to show everyone very quickly what the petition that people signed was. And it's very simple. It says at the top, petition requesting a vote be taken to remove Christina Karamo as officer of Michigan Republican State Committee. There's 2 paragraphs here, which are the bylaws that we just went over. And then at the bottom, it's 2 sentences. It says, by completing this petition and providing your signature, you are requesting the vote to be taken to remove, in all capitals, Christina Karamo. This petition is not a vote or ballot for removal. So it's very clear what you're signing. You can't say, I'm not sure what I was signing, I didn't mean to sign that. It was very clear to every 54 of that people that signed that got that exact same thing. They signed it. You can't say you didn't know. And if you really didn't know and you're that reckless that you're signing things without reading that or not even able to understand that, then you probably shouldn't be on the state committee. So.
Take some questions.
Okay. Yeah, and I think that is the last slide. That is the last slide.
For about 3 questions. So
we have time for a few questions, and as I promised, I will stay afterwards and answer any questions that there are. Mr. Leatherman.
That's my understanding that.
I will repeat the question.
Bill Leatherman, I am a state committee member, and I have attended both of these meetings. It's my understanding that Christina has not been taking her salary.
Mr. Leatherman has said that it's his understanding that Christina has not been taking her salary. I believe that is since summertime she has not been taking her salary. Right. Which is only because they don't raise enough money to pay her. Is that?
No, I'm just.
Okay. That would be my answer to that. If you're not raising enough money to pay your own salary, I don't feel all that bad that you're not paying your salary. Yes, sir.
Where does this whole process go from here? Do you think it's going to go to courts or?
That's a great question. Where does the process go from here? Well, on Saturday the 20th, the state committee is meeting in Lansing to elect a new chair. At that point in time, there'll be a new chair, and there'll be Christina saying she's still chair, and that will get resolved whether it's through the courts, through the RNC, whether Mr. Trump says I back this side or that side. At some point there will be resolution. And like I said at the beginning, we anticipated it would go to a court, or at least to the RNC through some sort of legal review. So everything that we've done, we did according to the bylaws with all the documentation, and that's already been submitted to the RNC.
One more question.
Any more questions? Yes, ma'am.
So there's a lot of confusion in the Republican Party, and I'm also nervous about the fact that we are not really prepared.
What? Stand up.
Speak up.
Right, so,
I will repeat the question.
So I'm wondering, what is the Republican Party doing to change this view of the Republican Party, because there's a lot of division.
So the question is basically that there's a lot of confusion She's concerned that we're not prepared for the election, and what are we doing to kind of unify and change that? And the answer is we're getting a new chair, and we're going to start on the business of raising money, building organization, and focusing on winning elections. I see a lot more questions.
Dan, does the RNC have the power in this to make this change and then let the lawsuits fall outside of that?
In all essence, yes. We're part of the Republican National Party, so we're like a chapter of it. So if they say that this is the way it's going to be, then everyone is going to agree with that.
And then she can sue them or do whatever.
Yeah.
But we have somebody in charge, just like
Correct.
this lady said, we gotta get the show on the road.
Yep, and that's what we want to do. So if you have further questions, I will stay after the meeting and answer any questions that there are. I'm getting.
Oh, he wants
Can I ask one more question?
one more. This.
Okay. So it sounds to me, and I'm not on the state committee, and I don't really fully understand it, but it sounds like there's some technicalities about two different meetings, and whether Christina called it, when she called it, or how she called it about fish versus dogs or whatever. But the bottom line is, the way I understand it, is 40 people met and voted to remove Christina, but then on the second meeting, 60% or 60 people voted to keep her in. So the bottom line is the state committee seems to be in favor of Christina, and I don't know about all the other stuff. I don't know the intricacies of how much debt was inherited or how much money she's supposed to be fundraising, but it seems to be the majority of what was the original 107 people or 106 people on the state committee. They're in favor of keeping her. Why are we fighting about this? It seems like the kind of technicalities that the establishment rhinos tried to do against Trump and the Democrats with all this legalese and trying to.
No, I appreciate the question. The answer to that is that some of that is misleading, because some of the members that were part of our group were purged, and other people have already replaced them and went to Christina's meeting. The other part of it is there is one meeting. I mean, it might be technical, but what's right is right, and we are the party of law and order. So we do what the rules say we do. And we had a meeting, it was properly called on the 6th, and if Christina told her people not to come, that's not our responsibility. That's a poor choice on her decision. Those people were welcome to come. We wanted them to come, and if they came, they might have stopped the result, but they didn't come. You can't go to your county clerk on a Wednesday in November and say, well, I had a whole bunch of people that meant to vote in the election, so we need to change the election result, or re-hold the election on a new day.
So how many people in
you
the-
have to
on the-
vote on the day that the
How
vote
many
takes
people
place.
on the 13th were replaced
All right,
and
so-
weren't part of the original state committee?
Dan is gonna stay back afterwards. I wanna make sure our next
Yeah.
speaker has enough time,
Okay.
but
I want to thank Dan very much, and again.